Short reporting there. I'm now joined from Washington by Jim Manley, a Democrat strategist who worked for, amongst others, Senator Ted Kennedy, and also by Chris Garcia, who actually worked for the Donald Trump presidency as Deputy Director of the Department of Commerce. Thanks both for joining us. Just to explain to my viewers, there's a very long delay in our satellite. But let me start with you, Chris Garcia. Early reports were that there was a very high turnout. Is that still so, do you think? And do you accept, Chris, that this is very much a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency?
Sure. No, great question. I think this is the question that everybody has today is, will Americans accept or reject the policies of Donald Trump during his first term in office? I think when you take a look at the economic output that's happened under President Trump, where previously under President Obama we were looking at 1 to 2% GDP growth as what was called, quote, the new normal, President Trump has brought that up to 3 or 4%. He's brought back 450,000 manufacturing jobs. Those are jobs that President Obama said were never going to return. And the president's taken on this America First agenda. And I think that a lot of Americans can identify with that. If a president of the United States is elected, his obligation and his priority, his allegiance, should be to his people first. So I think it's a referendum on whether America First is what Americans want to see, and whether that's being communicated is another topic that we can get into. But 90% of the coverage in the United States has been negative in the media here in the United States against President Trump. So that's something to consider taking this election into sight as well.
Jim Manley, in terms of the turnout, is it still looking like it's a high turnout? And therefore, are you hoping that will work to your Democrat advantage?
Based on everything I've heard and seen so far, we are looking, yes, once again at incredibly high turnout. And I think that is only going to benefit Democrats, because all the energy and enthusiasm is coming from the left, who've had it with Donald Trump. He's become absolutely radioactive for a great majority of Americans, especially in the suburban districts, the so-called swing districts. And yes, I think that's going to bode well for us tonight.
And yet, Democrats, are you sure you'll be able to bring out your core voters that departed you in the past, Jim, largely because of, the way they felt they were being talked down to, in terms of being described as deplorables, etc.?
Well, Miriam, I spent 2016 inauguration day with you, so I was wrong then. We'll see about what's going to happen tonight, but everything I've seen so far suggests that we're going to have a good night.
And Chris, it's extraordinary in a way. Like, the American economy is booming, and yet your president chose not to focus on that, not to give people continuing hope, but to focus on fear, to talk about the caravan, and to focus on the fears of many Americans that they have in relation to immigration.
Well, there are a couple of things to take into consideration during a midterm election. Number one, it's that historically presidents will always lose, on average, about 25 seats in the House of Representatives. It doesn't happen very often that Republicans or that a sitting president's party will gain seats in the House. So I think that we're expecting to see at least a wave, if you will, of the opposite party. But in terms of the economic numbers, one thing that President Trump said early on in his campaign is that we're going to win so much that you're going to say, please, Mr. President, we can't take the winning. Please stop. There's a little bit of truth to that, in that when Americans are doing well, when things are going well, we want to expect that that's going to be continued. We expect that we continue to do well, and so I think the president is reminding Americans about what is at stake if the House is taken over by the Democrats, and that would be open borders. That would be very little oversight as to who comes in. And this issue of immigration has really become an issue of national security in the president's eyes and in the eyes of his supporter. We have to know who is coming in and who is going to be inside our country if we allow them access.
And Jim, if you do succeed in Democrats and take,
if I can jump in, Miriam.
Okay.
The problem I have with that assessment is that, the fact of the matter is he is not running on the economy. He's not running on tax cuts. All he's got left is to go into the gutter and demonizing immigrants, talking about beautiful barbed wire, talking about a caravan of immigrants that are thousands of miles away. It's just it's back to the politics of fear and smear. That's all he's got. He's made his bet that that's what's going to get him over the goal line. I'm suggesting that's not going to necessarily be the case, and we'll see what happens tonight.
But Jim, if you do succeed as Democrats in taking back the House of Representatives. 1 second, Chris. If you do succeed, Jim Manley, as Democrats in taking back the House of Representatives, are you just going to block and obstruct, or are you going to, in a sense, try to be helpful and to help get legislation passed?
Well, Miriam, let's remember what we're talking about here. The House would be under Democratic control. They would control the agenda. They would try and move legislation, which, like health care reform, for instance, which they've talked about plenty. And then the question then is what's going to happen in a Senate that's probably going to be still under Republican control and a president that still has a veto threat. It takes two to tango. I know Leader Pelosi very well, and if she has a chance to get something done, she's going to go for it. However, she's also not going to cut deals just for the sake of cutting deals. And the only way anything is going to get done is if this president finally learns, the president and his team, I should add, finally learn how to navigate the legislative process and work with Hill leaders to get something done. If not, nothing's going to happen.
Chris, come back in there.
Yeah, well, so I'll firstly comment that the president is always willing to work with Democrats. In fact, if your viewers will recall, the president has actually been he was a Democrat for most of his life. He worked very well with both sides of the aisle as a businessman. To take into consideration the issue of national security and security at the border, the president's rhetoric has been really surrounding the threat of the oversight of illegal immigration. There's a huge difference between legal immigration and doing it the right way and illegal immigration, which is unfettered access to the United States by who knows. So I think it's really the majority of Americans, and I think the majority of Hispanics, in fact, support legal immigration, but it's not the illegal immigration that I think many Americans fear would surge under a Democrat-controlled House. But in terms of the agenda and what would be on the legislative agenda if Democrats take the House, if they're willing to put forward a comprehensive immigration plan that would tackle some of the border issues, that would enhance our security at the border in exchange for some pathways to legal status, I think that President Trump would be willing to play ball. And if the Democrats want to continue the policies of pro-growth, of lower taxes for middle-income Americans, lower taxes on businesses to make sure they can grow and expand the old-fashioned way, I think President Trump is willing to play ball there as well.
Jim, in terms of President Trump's legacy, I mean, he's reimposed sanctions against Iran, he left the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement, he's left the Paris Climate Accord, he's appointed 2 Supreme Court justices, he's resisting gun control. At the end of the day, he already has a legacy.
Well, he sure does have a legacy. He's probably going to go down as the worst president in the United States probably since the early 1800s. He's also a president, by the way, who's got historically low poll numbers. Having said that, if we're struggling to try and find nice things to say about him, I will agree that he has cemented what is left of his legacy by advancing judges. Beyond that, all I've seen is a president who lives to divide this country, exploiting divisions, and is doing nothing to try and bring us together as we face, some difficult times here.
Chris, how big a blow would it be? I mean, if Democrats did manage to take back the House of Representatives, if you lost the Senate, how big a blow would that be for Donald Trump? And would it mean he really couldn't run for a second term?
I actually think that if the Democrats take the House, I predict that the Republicans will keep control of the Senate. But in the offshot chance that Democrats take both the House and the Senate, I think you can guarantee a Trump victory in 2020. I think that the Trump base will be emboldened, that they'll see a repeat of the Kavanaugh hearings, which was a disgrace to the entire judicial confirmation process. But to the point that President Trump has a legacy that he'll go down as the worst president in history, I think it's exactly the opposite. Much like they said it was going to be Trump that caused an economic crash, it's been the opposite, that President Trump has caused an economic boom, where we have all-time low unemployment for African Americans, all-time low unemployment for Hispanic Americans. We have more Americans working today and off of food stamps. More Americans are working today than in the history of the United States.
Okay.
These are great numbers. If Americans look at their paychecks today, they can see more money in their bank account because the IRS is taking less out. That's a wonderful thing.
Okay, final word to you, Jim Manley, and a quick one, please.
It's been a fascinating time, but I'm glad it's finally over. Having said that, your viewers simply need to know that it's may get a little weird after this. The president, by all accounts, is prepared to reshuffle his cabinet. We have the Mueller investigation right around the corner, and there's a threat of a government shutdown, again, courtesy of Republicans, courtesy of Donald Trump in December.
Okay.
He's
Jim
not
Manley,
getting his wall money.
Jim Manley, appreciate you speaking tonight. You too, Chris Garcia. Thank you both very much.